Hello and welcome to another episode of Professional Book Girl. My name is Kayla and I read a ton of books that I recommend the best to you. And this is the January book club episode. So if you have never tuned into an episode of the show before, or this is your first book club, welcome. Once a month, I pick a book for all of us to read, and then I go through as I read it, I take random little notes, and I basically say everything that happened in the book while giving my thoughts on it. That is what we're doing on this episode. Our June book club pick was Darling Girls by Sally Hepworth. If you have not read this book and you want to, don't listen to this episode until you've read it, because I'm about to tell you every single thing that happens in it. Let's just jump right into it, really. So I chose this book because I thought it would be fun to do another thriller. There's a pool on the cover. I was like, it's giving summer vibes. I really like Sally Hepworth's books. I've read like 4 other ones. I think that they're like ridiculous and twisty page turners, and that's why they make for like a great beach or pool read. I also love an Australian thriller. All of her books take place in Australia. She is Australian. I went into this though not knowing what it was about, although I did know it would be about sisters, because I used to listen every day like years ago, but I dabble still with the podcast The Toast. It used to be in the Morning Toast, and it's like 2 sisters and they have 2 other sisters and they like to read and they'll talk about books. And they said that Sally named all the sisters in her book after them, and like they talked about it multiple times, but then the sisters were not named after them. So I'm wondering if that's only in like the Australian edition or something, but I knew it would be about sisters. I didn't know that there would be so much child abuse in this book. So obviously I can't give a content warning for a book I've never read, but I'm sorry if some of you were reading it and you were like, what the hell is she making us read? Like, I had no idea that that's what it was going to be about. It sounds so bad to say after I just said that there's child abuse in this book. I liked this though. Like, I thought it was really twisty. You're going to hear as I talk about it, there were things that I was like, I didn't know what certain things were going to be. I thought it was such a page turner. I was reading it so quickly. The things that the girls went through, I was just like, I loved them and their bond. And so I don't know, like I liked it. I should probably go to therapy. Okay, so let's get into it. So we have an opening with a psychiatrist, and we know that this person is sitting in a psychiatrist's office, like telling their life story, but we don't know who they are yet. Then we learn about the house that has the name Wild Meadows, and I wrote, I love a house with a name because I do. And the therapist, though, like right away, I was like, this guy seems kind of shady, and I was like, he like only wants to talk about what happened at the house. So I was like, okay, maybe this was like a famous case or something that happened. So we meet our first main character, Jessica, and she has an organization business, which I thought was like a random and fun career for her to have. And she seems, at this point, we only know her, and we start hearing about her sister, Nora, and just seems like the organized older sister, and Nora is a bit of a mess. And one of her client that day like accuses her of stealing a thing of Valium, and she was like, absolutely not, whatever. And then it turns out she did. So I was like, okay, this is interesting. And right away she gets a call from a detective. And like, I guess you could say like the story kicks off from there. So we now meet the third sister, and her name is Alicia. And at first I thought she was a foster mother. I think she was just a social worker. I couldn't really figure out what she did, but throughout the whole book, I really liked reading about her with the kids. I thought it was very special. But when we first meet her, there's like this toddler who, I guess like the Theo, who's a toddler, was like placed with this woman, and then Alicia was there checking on him. And we find out now all the sisters are together, and we find out that they found a body. And this is when the dual timeline kicks in. So we then learn that they're foster sisters. I didn't realize that at first. The way that she introduced that was by like when we were in Nora's first perspective, she said that her mom was Lebanese, and then we learned that Jess's mom was Chinese. So I was like, okay, they're not related. They're foster sisters. So the foster mom, I can't remember her name. Miss Fairchild. I was calling her FC in my notes. Honestly, like, I hate when I'm reading the book club because I take notes and I feel like I have my phone out the whole time. So I was just like, there's abbreviations all over on here. But Jess's parents die and she has to go into foster care, and um the social worker, I think his name was Steve, he's like, you're very lucky to come here, and it's like this beautiful house. What we learn is Wild Meadows, there's a pool outside, and the foster mom is like on the patio, and I said she was giving like Miss Honey from Matilda vibes. Like she seemed like everything was so perfect. And then she says like, I'll make you forget about your mom. And I wrote sinister, like that is so sinister. And she starts treating the 4-year-old like she's a baby. And at first it was like, just seemed like she was being really well cared for, but then she has to go to school and Miss Fairchild isn't happy that she had fun at school. And I wrote, it's giving Gypsy Rose, because I obviously am obsessed with Gypsy Rose Blanchard. I have been since that case broke the news and The Bitch is Dead hit Facebook, and I've been following, and I'm still following. And it's like the gift that keeps on giving. And it just gave me like Dee Dee and Gypsy vibes, the way that she was like super babying this child, until like we really see how sinister Miss Fairchild is when she basically almost drowns Jess. And then we learn that even though they're in this giant, luxurious house, like she's so cheap with her money. And she says like electricity and gas are a luxury. And she makes her clean, like Cinderella vibes. She's always cleaning. And then another girl comes, and this girl we know is Nora, and the social worker makes it out that she is like so troubled, and Miss Fairchild kind of loses interest in Jess when she has someone else that like will like need her. But Nora has been in the foster care system, and I thought it was really sad. Like she knew all the questions she was supposed to ask you. She says like things that have happened to her in the system, and you understand why. But when we met her as an adult, like she seems troubled still, because this girl has just gone through it. Right before that, though, I wrote, we're back at the psychiatrist. The patient's anonymous. Is it Miss Fairchild? I really went back and forth on if that was the patient or not. And in the beginning, we're starting to get the person in the psychiatrist's office is like slowly telling their life story. And at first I thought it was kind of boring, until we'll get into it when some wild things start happening over there. So now that Nora is in the house, Miss Fairchild doesn't want Jess to call her mom. She's like, why are you calling me that? Which I just thought was crazy. And then I wrote, which I got my copy from Book of the Month, and it had so many typos, which like, and now and then a typo happens in a book, fine, whatever. But like there were so many, I was like, what the heck is going on here? So Nora on her first night says that she's scared of the dark. And Jess was like, that was a mistake to tell her what you're scared of. So I was like, oh my God, what is going on here? And then we really start to learn when Alicia needs somewhere to stay that she's only in it for the money, because that guy, Steve, the social worker, comes and he's like, it's just a respite case. So her grandma has custody of her. The grandma's in the hospital. Like she'll just be here until she's done. And she's like, okay, I'll take the money. And it reminded me of the Mary-Kate and Ashley movie, It Takes Two, which growing up, I'm sure like most of us, I was obsessed with Mary-Kate and Ashley. Like literally Mary-Kate and Ashley were my imaginary friends. And I loved the movie It Takes Two. And that scene when Mary-Kate has to go to that foster family, like just gave me nightmares. And that's what Fairchild started to remind me of. And like right away, she hates Alicia. She starts picking on her for like being hungry when she's starving them. And I guess because she can tell that like she's a child that doesn't, obviously she needs love, but like she comes from such a loving household and she just wants to get back to it. And like she's not relying on this adult for what she doesn't have, because she has it with her grandma. So Fairchild just like hates her on sight. And now in the current timeline, we learn that she's not a foster mother, but like she works with foster kids. And this is when I started putting together that she's probably a social worker. And then back in the other timeline, I wrote she's making her eat off the floor with 5,000 exclamation points, because Alicia was like, Fairchild was like starving them. So Alicia snuck downstairs in the night to eat something, and she like spilled some crumbs. Then Fairchild like dumped beans all over the kitchen floor and made her eat it, which was just like disgusting to do, and for Alicia to have to do that and for her to make her do that. So then I said, I hope that the body is Fairchild and that they killed her. So then we see we're at the psychiatrist, and like she sees like in the files him going to F for Fairchild. So I was like, okay, is it her in the psychiatrist's office? But now we're back in the current time, and the girls had to travel to the town that they grew up in, that Wild Meadows is in, to go to these police interviews. And now there's another quick flashback. It's so back and forth. I feel like everything I'm saying is back and forth, back and forth. But when I'm reading that, I love it. Trying to tell a concise story is a little crazy. But Nora doesn't know when her actual birthday is, which I thought was so sad. But then the girls throw her a silent dance party, which was so sweet. And then Alicia's grandma passed, so they had to stay in the house, or she had to stay, and the three of them decide that they're sisters. And this is like, we already saw their bond, but like this is really when it starts, and like you see that it's still lasted as they were adults. And I just thought it was like really special and sweet the way that they cared for each other. We also learned that Nora watched her mom die, which is just very upsetting. And then I said, this is basically trauma porn, but it's a page turner and I'm flying through it. And we then are back in the current time, and they go back to visit the Meadows. And basically the whole thing was that it was knocked down because they were putting a McDonald's in, which was so random, and they found a body. So they go to the site of the house, and there's other foster kids there, and they were like, what other foster kids? And then they were like, oh, it's the babies. And then we learned that the body that was found was a baby. And then they all go to the pub, and Fairchild shows up there. So I was like, what the fuck? Like, this was like banger after banger, like crazy things happening. And then that's when I was like, maybe it's not Fairchild and the psychiatrist, because she's here and she's like happy to see them and acting like nothing happened. And she's like, I want to help out in the case. And she's like, they definitely killed someone. Like, look at Nora. She's crazy. Insane. So also in the modern timeline, I wrote that I love Alicia and Aaron's relationship. Aaron is this 17-year-old foster child who's about to age out of the system, and he calls Alicia because he started bonding with the toddler Theo, and he wants to know if he can foster Theo when he turns 18. And I had like crying emojis in my note that I wrote that I thought that was just like so sweet and so heartbreaking. And then we learned that like Nora is basically being blackmailed for revenge porn, because in the beginning of the book she was on this date with this guy and like ran out, and then he followed her, and so she punched him in the face, and now he's like saying he'll press charges if she doesn't keep sending like photos of herself. And like I was like, this is like a really crazy side plot. And then the police are like, why didn't you tell us about the fourth sister? And I was like, what the fuck? And then we learned that there was this baby Amy who came, who was like, so she was like 1 or 2. Is that still a baby? I don't know. But she wasn't a newborn like the other babies. Also, the other babies, I skipped over this. Like, Fairchild didn't like to take care of them, so the kids literally stopped going to school so they could take care of these babies, which was insane. Like, what social worker is not checking up on that? And the social worker part of all this, and I think this is why I liked Alicia so much, not to make it about me, but like I always make it about me. I think I've spoken about this before on the internet somewhere, but my mom adopted my cousin when I was 15. He was 12. He's 3 years younger than me. And like tragic circumstances led to that. He had nowhere to go, and it was like he can live with us or he can go to foster care. And so obviously he came to live with us. And I kind of always forgot that it was like this, because it was just seems like such a blip in my life. But his social worker was such an amazing woman and so on it. And he was moving into like a happy, healthy house, although my parents did get divorced. He moved in on Halloween. My parents got divorced on Christmas. So that was a crazy year. But she would come over all the time. She would just show up. We wouldn't know she was showing up. Like, my house was the house that everyone hung out at. So there'd always be friends over. So like all of our friends knew the social worker. Her name was Roxy. And like we all like really got to know her and love her. And she did so right by my cousin, like helping my mom fight the school for the services that he needed, and for like just everything. Like, there's a lot that goes into it, and like I've seen that firsthand. So to see, obviously it's a book, but like that this does happen though. Like, someone who's, why go into this profession if you're not gonna like do right by these kids? That's your job to, you're the only advocate that they have. So I'm not even flagging that they weren't at school. Also, everything with Fairchild, it comes out in the end that he was like a shitty, shady guy. But I just kept thinking about Roxy and how she would never. So the baby, that Amy doesn't like Fairchild, and like Fairchild is trying to like fully like coddle her, and she adopted her. Like, she's not even fostering her. And they start getting nervous because the Amy like does not like her. So they'll be like like, oh, we'll give you chocolate if you hug her. And like, they're trying to save her. And at one point, a social worker comes, like Alicia's social worker, because she had a different one. And Fairchild like locks Jessica and Amy in the basement. And when they're in the basement, they saw this doll that said Amy on it. And she was like, what the heck does that mean? So there's this incident where Fairchild like dropped Amy or something and she hit her head, and the girls start to get really worried. So they're like, we're going to tell the principal what's been going on. So they go to tell the principal. But now we're in the current time and we learn that there's no record or like any sign that Amy ever existed. And they basically start like, you learn that like Jess was basically told through therapy that she made Amy up, and that's why they didn't mention her when like they're being interviewed by the police. And then Zara, who was one of the babies, starts asking about Dirk, who is this guy that worked on the property, and his last name. And I was like, huh, that's a little suspicious. So the police, now we're back in the past, and they told their principal, and like the school has to report it, and the police go to the house, and there's no sign of Amy there though. Like, where is Amy? Nobody knows, like, does Amy even exist at this point? And like, obviously, I believe the girls and like that Amy exists. And because of all the allegations that they laid out against Fairchild, I was very happy about this. They didn't go back to live there after that. So they refused to be separated. I don't know if this was unrealistic that they like that the foster care people would have like listened to that, but because they wouldn't be separated, they went to a respite home, and then they ended up in a group home. And the therapist told them like that they made Amy up completely. So now we're back at the psychiatrist, and the person at the psychiatrist is giving her story. And at the point in her story now, she is pregnant. We learn that her mom had married this guy from the church, and he was like really horrible, and he was assaulting her, and she ends up pregnant. So then in the current timeline, we're learning though that if the body that was found turns out to be Amy, it's going to be a police and a political issue, because at the time when the girls reported something was going on, they were like, she doesn't exist. So now they're worried that they're like trying to cover everything up. And we learn that Fairchild knows that Jessica is addicted to pills. And I thought that their relationship was so interesting. And like, we see Jess hug Fairchild, and like, I think Nora saw it, and she was like, why is she hugging her? Because I guess because she was with Fairchild first, and she went in the youngest out of the three sisters. Like, she was 4 years old there. And at first, Fairchild acted so great towards her. So Jess was always striving to be back at that. And there's something in her, even as an adult, even knowing all the horrible things she did, that like still wants to please her. And we end up learning that Jessica would tell Fairchild everything back in the day. And that's how she knew that they were going to report her to the school that day. And part of me was like, wouldn't she have just like not sent them to school because she knew she was doing that? But that's how like Amy came to be like disappeared, because she knew what was about to happen. And I just thought that relationship was like very interesting, just so complex, like everything with Jessica and Fairchild. Now we're back in the psychiatrist, and we learned the girl named her daughter, her baby Amy. So like webs being woven here. Then in the current timeline, we learn that Jessica overdoses, and then at the same time, then Nora like decides to take legal action against the revenge porn, thank God. And the guy Kevin was a school vice principal, so they got him. She's safe from that. We're back with psychiatrists, and the patient there, got away with the baby Amy. And then back quickly in the current timeline, Dirk, who was the guy who worked on the estate, admits that he lied back in the day about the baby because he was like a registered sex offender. So Fairchild had blackmailed him. So then we learned the big twist that Zara, who was like one of the quote unquote babies, actually is Amy. So Amy, that the girls knew, is safe. She's alive. She grew up in a happy family. The body that was found is of a 1-year-old. So at this point, I was like, who is in the psychiatrist? Because like now at this point, I didn't think it was Fairchild, because like I was like, oh, she's out because she's like torturing them at the pub. And I was like, where, like, what's the baby? So the psychiatrist girl basically like loses her Amy to her mom and her stepdad. And then Fairchild admits at psychiatrist, she admits that they've dead baby is her baby, and then we learned that it was like Fairchild in the psychiatrist, so I was right at first. And she would foster to feel the love of her real baby because her parents told her that she was adopted, but they actually killed her. So now Fairchild's in jail. Jessica visits her in jail. We learned that the social worker Scott is going to jail because he was selling babies on the black market, and that's how Fairchild got Amy, which this is so before you were yours vibes, which is about, I talk about this book all the time, historical fiction about a real life thing. This woman, Georgia Tan, who was so evil, who would like steal poor children and like put them up for adoption and basically sell them to these wealthy families. So insane. Google it or read before we were yours. Then we kind of go to I think we flash forward a little bit, and Jessica's pregnant. Nora went to jail, but now she's with the hot bartender she met in the hometown, which I was like, okay, good for her. And then Zara found out who her birth parents were, her biological parents. So Alicia's in therapy, and she says Grammy would have been proud of her, and I thought that was very sweet. And then she adopted Aaron and Theo, which I also thought was so sweet. And then Aaron had said in the beginning of the book, like, he was lucky to have a place to stay. And she was like, you're not lucky. Like, that's a basic right. Like, you, like, don't think that you're lucky for having that. And he says to her, am I lucky now? Because now he has so much more. And she says, we're the lucky ones. And then I wrote, oh my God, the last chapter, she made up everything she said in the psychiatrist. Her parents were actually nice, and Amy was actually her baby sister that she killed. So this is the fastest I've ever gone through this. It was a fast read. There's not much for me to like in-depth analyze here. It was such a ridiculous, crazy ride, which is what I expect from Sally Hepworth books, which like every now and then I like a ridiculous book. I thought that the twist at the end, that last chapter, I was like, oh my God. Like, I thought that was really good. And it just showed how like manipulative and crazy and fucked up Miss Fairchild really was. This will not go down as being one of my favorites. Like, thinking about, like, I gave it 4 stars because I flew through it and I like couldn't put it down. But subject wise, like, I guess it could have been a 3-star read. Like, I don't know. I just like, I couldn't put it down. It was twisty. Things really surprised me. Like, that's what I like in a thriller. And when I pick up a book like this, that's what I know I'm getting. And sometimes you just want that. So I got what I wanted from this one. We do have listener thoughts from friend of the pod, Liz. So I'm going to read her email now. Okay, she says, hey, Kayla, hope you were good. Enjoyed the 5-star reads episode this morning. I try my best to keep up with your book club, but my mood reader mind takes over, so sometimes I'm late to the party. But this month I read The Darling Girls. I read The Darling Girls last week, enjoyed it, gave it a 3-star rating. Overall, I love the sisters' relationship and how we got to see the bond formed and was tested. The middle and younger sisters were my favorite. The older one just got on my nerves. Overall, the mystery was interesting. I honestly thought it was Amy who was found. I didn't like the foster mom, not that we were supposed to, but I just got the creeps from her. I also didn't love the psych conversations that ended up being her and the jail psychologist or whatever they were. Every time one popped up, I felt removed from the story and took me a second to get back into it. The very ending twist with her changing her story, I didn't see coming and was a great way to end it. Overall, the book was good, but not my favorite mystery thriller. Hope you liked it. Can't wait for next month's read. So me and Liz basically felt the same. Without further ado, this is the shortest book club episode ever, but I don't want to ramble nonsense when I just told you everything I thought about it. I am so excited to announce this book club. We are having another thriller for July because we are reading Middle of the Night by Riley Sager. I feel like you guys probably know. I have such a love-hate relationship with Riley Sager. His book came out in June. It's been out for like 2 weeks now. There's probably going to be a Libby wait. It is available from Book of the Month. They added it as a June add-on in the middle of June. So I don't have a copy yet. I have not read it yet. I'm going to be getting it in my July box. So you can get it for cheaper from there. I feel like I just have to do it as a book club pick because I know I will have so much to say because I always have so much to say about all of his books. I have such a love-hate relationship with him because it all started because I thought that it was a woman and for the first 3 books I read. And then I learned it was a man. And in like House on the Lake, there were some things that annoyed me. I loved the last one though, the only one left. I think that's what it's called. I gave that 5 stars. Interested to see where this one goes. This is his first book written from a male point of view. So I'm interested, and like he's an autobiography author for me. I always have a lot of thoughts. I know you guys usually like to hear my thoughts on his books. So I was like, do you know what? Perfect for a book club pick. So our July book club will be on August 1st. So you have the full month to get and read Middle of the Night by Riley Sager. Please have your thoughts submitted to me by July 30th if you would like them included in the episode. That is our show. Thank you so much for listening. Please make sure you're following, subscribe, whatever it's on whatever podcast platform you are listening on. Follow me on Instagram at KRoadWhat. Follow the show at Professional Book Girl. Leave a rating and review. Pick up Middle of the Night by Riley Sager. I will see you on Monday.